Today we're going to take a look at Mercy's Drift Spec 180 and see really what it takes to build and tune a drift car in modded Need for Speed Heat.
Welcome to the intro to drifting in modded Need for Speed. It's really not that hard. All you have to do is just set up drift parts like this, drift suspension, drift tires, and drift differential. If you're a beginner, it's probably best to start with something simple like the Pro tires and to make sure that you have a decent amount of horsepower. Depending on who you talk to, it's actually easier to drift with more or less horsepower. I recommend a moderate amount if you've never drifted before in any game whatsoever. Usually that means all super parts or purple. Now, as for the rest of the parts on the car, not to worry about NOS.
I need NOS.
Okay, you're not going to need to worry so much about your auxiliary. Your auxiliary is an afterthought, okay? But your gearbox and your clutch does matter. Obviously, the better the clutch, the faster you're going to be able to put power down and to shift, okay? In the cases of people with a lot of power, maybe they might want to add some delay. If you're a beginner, you're not going to have to worry about that. All you really need is to make sure you have an Elite Plus clutch, enough gears for however much power that you have. Now, I'm going to go over that very briefly for a second. The gears are going to matter because of your car's power to grip ratio, and that's going to be reflected in the acceleration rating, as you can see here in the top left. It's going to be the third bar. What that is basically just how fast your car is going to be able to grip up. It's not just like the standard, like 0 to 60. If you're in a drift car, the regular stats, like the quarter mile, that isn't going to matter, okay? What matters is, how fast your car is during angle. And you're going to use that acceleration rating as a way to gauge, how fast your car is going to be. Right now, I am looking at, let's say about 650 horsepower. Yeah, like 636. And I've got all pro parts. That should be pretty balanced as a beginner build, okay? Nothing too crazy, nothing too short on power. It's a respectable amount. Now, if I added more gears to this, I would actually end up having a short gear ratio on the car, and that's actually gonna reflect in the stats, as you can see here. Having more gears slows me down, just barely, okay? Not by much, okay? It's literally just you building more torque because your gears are shorter, right? You having to spin your wheels more equals the car having less acceleration overall. Now, that could be a good or a bad thing depending on what kind of driver you are. For the sake of, a beginner build, usually you're looking at like a 5-speed or a 6-speed. Depends on how aggressive you are, okay? I'm gonna go for 6-speed. Now, another detail that isn't often talked about, there's basically no such thing as an automatic drift car. You're gonna have to run a manual gearbox. Okay? Auto reverse mechanic isn't gonna come into factor for 90% of scenarios, okay? It's only gonna matter if you're doing really, really low speed drifts. So we're talking like 0 to 15 miles an hour or sub 20 miles an hour. In that case, if you brake, then you have a small chance of your car shifting into reverse. And logically, that's terrible. You don't want that. Okay, so I recommend turning that off, just like how you swap to manual, because that puts your car in a complete manual scenario, and you don't want the CPU to all of a sudden take over. Okay, nobody wants that. As for the actual tune on the car itself and the live tune, I'm gonna go over that in just a second as well. In Need for Speed, they did a very good job of simplifying that process. With the live tune, this is very important, okay? I won't go into like the very, very, deeper details of it. I'm just gonna briefly brush over what the aspects of the live tune does, okay? So what you see here at the top is the self-steer, or the caster, if you are familiar with it in drift terms, okay? That is simply how fast do you want, or how much do you want the car to steer itself. Now that is very important. if you want to make the car respond to your throttle more reasonably. Okay, once you're in angle, the car is gonna catch, like literally catch. Like the wheel is gonna steer by itself if you have the self steer all the way up. Now, even if you turn that all the way down, the car will still do it, but it's gonna be so small that you're gonna have to be doing most of the steering instead in order to keep the car drifting. Not recommended for beginners. If you're a beginner, definitely turn the self steer up all the way. The steering sensitivity, on the other hand, that is going to be how fast the wheel is gonna react, okay? Or even your sway bars, okay? To begin with, I would say start off all the way low, like turn it all the way down in order to make the car as stable as possible. Now that is gonna make it a little sluggish, but as you get used to, you know, your day-to-day practice in drifting the car, you're gonna want to like turn it up slowly over time, okay? It is not recommended to go all the way up in steering sensitivity at all. Unless you want to spin out very, very fast, very, very quickly. Now, the next two options are not as important. The traction control, logically, you're not gonna need that for drifting. You're only gonna need to worry about your brake bias. Pretty self-explanatory. Front brake bias means you're stopping the wheels in the front. Rear brake bias means you're stopping the wheels in the rear. What does that do, though, when you're actually drifting? Depends on how you brake. Okay, it depends on the type of driver you are. Generally speaking, you want to use a front brake bias if you want to get more angle without slowing down as much while you're on throttle. And then you want to use a rear brake bias in order to grip up faster and or drift in between initiations, or manji is what it's called, okay? When you're in between different drifts, having a rear brake bias really helps. Now, if you have it in the middle, that is a balanced brake differential, which means that your car is gonna be balanced when it brakes, okay? The whole car is gonna slow down a lot more easily, all right? And that can be useful for, you know, high horsepower cars, and maybe not so much on low horsepower cars. That more or less covers everything. I really hope to see more people out there drifting in a way that isn't embarrassing, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. We all have to start somewhere, but you're not going to get anywhere without practice.